Morality is a rather complex thing with a good bit of subjectivity to it. As we observe and engage with both the real world and fictional settings, we apply our own set of ideas about right and wrong. We view individual actions, characters and groups through a lens of our own life experience. I'm just stating the obvious right now, and since we all define good and evil differently, I'm not here to preach of where I personally draw those lines. However, where those lines lie for factions, belief systems and potentially the universe itself does have significant implications from a world-building perspective. But to really sink our collective teeth into this topic, I should first and foremost establish what I even mean by a morality system. The rather popular D&D alignment chart may be associated with this concept, but that is not what I would like to address. An alignment, be it good, evil or neutral, is classified or chosen within a set moral framework. The question for this topic is not whether something is wicked, but what makes something wicked? What does that mean, and are there any ramifications, natural or otherwise? To help us better navigate the rather broad concept of morality systems, it is perhaps best we define some loose categories. It is practically impossible to discuss the subject matter as a whole without going into a chaotic frenzy of tangents. No, not this time. Anyway, the categories. So, I would divide the subject matter based on how the system is enforced, who deals out judgment, punishment or justice, in what manner are boons or accolades provided. Based on this criterion, I believe there are 4 large categories. The first one would entail settings where there is no dedicated faction or divine power to manage morality. Each group has their own ideas of good and evil, and they themselves act accordingly. Now, this would likely be the case in many worlds that belong to the upcoming categories, but the big difference is the absence. No sacred script holds the truth, no divine figure tallies wrongdoings, there is no heaven or hell. The second category would be worlds where there is judgment, but only after death, or a similar significant milestone. There may be an afterlife, or perhaps a higher state of existence, and one's fate after the crossing is based on what they did in their previous life. Essentially, a cosmic judge, maybe even a jury decide, applying their own concept of good or evil, a reward or punishment handed out after one's previous life has passed. The third group is similar, but with the entities that weigh morality transplanted into everyday life. This would mean a setting with a faction of mortal or immortal beings, divine or otherwise, that have a code, a scripture, a set of rules that either objectively or with some subjective leeway determine what is good and what is evil, a powerful collective that enforces their idea on the world. The significant difference between this category and the first one is the balance of power, or rather, a lack of it. The last one is perhaps one of the more uncommon and difficult to conceptualize ones. Essentially, there is a universal law of what is good or bad. The fabric of reality itself has potentially set the alignment of the participants and affects them as they walk their path. It is a rigid construct, a force of unavoidable consequence. Now, you might have already realized that settings can be a mixture of these 4. Indeed, they often are, but it is easiest to talk about the potential, the drawbacks, or the pitfalls of each separately. A large collection of ideas, as per usual, some of which you may find useful for your specific scenarios. Or maybe I'll just confirm everything you already know. Watch until the end to find out, I guess. Anyway, let's see the first group. Settings where there is no grand order or divine judgment, one where the inhabitants decide for themselves based on their internal beliefs and outside pressure. You may argue that this is the world we live in, and while I would personally agree, the various religions of the planet have different ideas about that. We are not here to determine the undeterminable though. We are here to explore this possibility. Now, the first thing I'd like to touch on is moral objectivism. While I do not support the concept of universal morals, especially in a world that came to be naturally without a creator entity, it is not as simple as that. From an evolutionary standpoint, there are behavioral patterns that favor animals, making them more likely to survive and pass on their traits, acquired either through instinct or learning. There are fundamental rights and wrongs that the majority of sapient life would agree on. In fact, sapience may not even be required. aiding others of our kind, caring for offspring, making a sacrifice for the benefit of others, sharing important resources with relatives and friends. These are acts one can appreciate even without a morality system of any kind. Now, evil is a little more complicated in this regard, but senseless violence, especially killing younglings, would be frowned upon in most scenarios. As I've mentioned, these are behavioral patterns that benefit or can hinder a species, and in any setting governed by evolution, they would have an effect on reproductive success. With that said, violence, even the murder of children, can have a positive effect in this regard and may not hinder an individual in passing down their genes and potentially their temperament. Infanticide is well documented among multiple animals. Sometimes it is incidental and does not lead to the extinction of a species simply by virtue of how many offspring they produce or how good the hatchlings are at avoiding their parents. Many fish eat their newborn. If you've ever had an aquarium with species from the Xiphophorus genus, you have probably experienced this phenomenon firsthand. I myself had platies, and assuring the survival of the next generation was always a struggle. But in an open environment, the hundreds of little fish that hatch will inevitably have some level of success and repeat the process. However, not all infanticide is incidental. Lions are a famous example of animals where males, and in some cases females, execute cubs. This most often happens when a new male takes charge of a pride, and he does this to remove the children of his predecessor from the gene pool. As heartless as this is, there are numerous advantages associated with the gruesome act. First off, the other lion was weaker, the new one was stronger. His genetics are potentially better and therefore could improve the species as a whole. Secondly, he means to reproduce. The females caring for the cubs of a different father reduce the attention and care his own would receive. They might not get the necessary nutrition, especially with limited resources available, and there is a real possibility of neglect detrimentally affecting their physical and social capabilities. Hence, the new male loses nothing and the species likely gains better genetics. Alternatively, females can abandon unhealthy or single cubs to try again. A new batch of kids has a higher success chance than focusing on only one. Should the lions gain sapience, would they reflect on this as a barbaric tradition, a necessary evil, or simply the way things are? Well, I'd say it is most likely that they would progressively abandon and grow to shun infanticide. Why? The other big thing that influences one's moral compass: compassion. The ability to relate to another being. Even if we do not feel what they feel, we have an idea and feel for them. It might be a trait that is highly variable, absent for some, while overflowing in others, but it is an undeniable part of sentience. Yes, sentience. It is not a human-only thing. You needn't look further than a loyal dog feeling for their owner, another member of their pack, perhaps a complete stranger. Now, I admit that compassion alone does not prevent villainy. Compassion did not stop humans from enslaving each other across the globe, to mutilate or gruesomely murder members of different groups, or to treat others like dirt. However, it does draw a line. And would these people truly reflect on what they did? Would they see themselves in those they mistreated? I do believe most of them would realize the error of their ways. But evolutionary success and empathy are not the sole determiners of morality. They are but fundamentals on which everything else lies. That everything else, though, that can have profoundly different outcomes. Belief systems, religions, ideologies often carry a moral component, a set of rules, stories, anecdotes, and teachings determining and discussing what should or should not, what can or must not be done. These evolve throughout the ages, and I would say they tend to move away from the base bestial instinct of an animal to the compassionate thoughtfulness of a person, with varying levels of success, of course. Now, in the vast majority of cases, the world builder has an initial idea or impression of a species, culture, or faction when establishing them, an opinion of what their alignment would be on a neutral moral scale. Fleshing out their history, tenets of their religion, and the special mythology can do a great deal in justifying why they believe something to be good and something else to be evil. It is a way to set up their affinity or intolerance towards other groups, or define their do's and don'ts. So much as setting eyes on an exceptional class of people may be a great sin, but executing a heathen, that is an honest day's work. A nation of people may act following a sacred text of what good is, and what reward awaits those that behave accordingly. A strong enough faith can make the world a better place, even if it is based on hollow speculation or lies, but it can also make it worse. One's perception and concept of evil may shift significantly with certain narratives or social structures. Take a mythology that features a messiah figure or a prophet brutally torturing and executing the personification of their idea of evil, or maybe significant non-believers. A story retold over and over, present prominently in society and preached by spiritual leaders. Alternatively, a religion that has a different wisdom flagellation. It is not they themselves who have to suffer as penance for their sins, but someone or something else. Would we see them as evil? Most of us would. Their society may breed sadistic people who view groups or species as subhuman, fit only to be punished and killed. But they would not see this as evil, not as long as their culture is saturated in this ideology. It would be righteous, or mundane. Modern humans, for the most part, think they have a pretty good idea of how to tell moral from immoral. But it would be naive to say that they are free of a distorting lens. To say that they see the world for what it is and are not basing their view of good and evil on biased knowledge. For instance, the fact that animals are all heterotrophic organisms in and of itself poses an interesting conundrum. We are capable of so much, and yet to further our existence, to extend our lives, we need to take the lives of other beings, be they plants, fungi, animals, or anything else. That being said, some of these are biases we do not need to think too hard about. After all, it is inherently impossible to conceive stuff we cannot comprehend or imagine, so why bother trying? The point is to not take the ideas of right and wrong for granted when building a world, but try and construct ourselves the biased lens our creations would look through. What people are born into, what they learn when growing up, and what their immediate surroundings hold righteous or despicable will shape their perception of reality. This can, for many, distort even base instinct or compassion, resulting in a completely new set of values. However, there is life beyond their limited scope, life with different ideas and ideals. Ultimately, these views will be tested against one another. Some will survive, others will not, but there is potential for any of them to make it. There have been great evils committed throughout human history which were not viewed as immoral at the time. Humanity has moved past a lot of them, but there are still horrendous things happening, caused by people who, at best, view it as a necessary evil. China! There still are, and there will likely always be, ideologies and belief systems that cause more harm than good, distorting people's viewpoints. Even though they may be malicious, it is not impossible for them to become the norm either. This group is essentially the vaguest, but has the most potential, in my humble opinion. It is basically a thought experiment. It is devising what a predefined society would believe in, or what society would a belief system generate, with the added twist that neither of them is truly correct. This concept would be present in the other groups too, to some extent. They might be influenced by the actual morality system in place, but I do not believe a setting with a population of more than a couple people could exist without the presence of different ideals. Even if there is one clearly defined, official view, there will be some whose moral compasses sway in a different direction. The second category. Settings where there is a defined morality system which does not come into play until some form of transition. This would be, in most cases, death. But not always. Moving from one existential stage to the next after living to a certain age or achieving something specific is one more option. There are other, albeit less common, alternatives. But to make this a bit easier to follow, I'll take the post-mortem approach. There are, of course, a couple of prerequisites needed for this to work. For instance, there has to be a soul or something that lives on after the corporeal body has abandoned its duty. It may be even just a digital copy of consciousness, or a perfect replica of the original person. Secondly, there has to be a place, a different plane of existence, a database, or anything that can contain and sustain it. Somewhere it can live on, some reason the separation of good and evil matters. Thirdly, there have to be creatures, spirits, entities capable of thought, or automated, potentially natural processes that do the sorting. One could go further and add multiple of either, complicating the whole ordeal. In either case, it is important to note that this adds a lot of extra material to Worldbuild. How did these places, entities, systems and rules come to be? How does the transition work? Can it be dismantled, or is it something immutable? Do the souls or their equivalents decay after a while, or do they persist indefinitely, becoming exponentially more populous in this separate reality? And perhaps the most crucial of it all, who does it apply to? Unless it is all a natural process, somebody or something has to have made a conscious decision of who and what to include. From a biological perspective, life is essentially on a spectrum. It would be rather difficult and extremely arbitrary to draw well-defined lines of what is capable of committing good and evil and what isn't. But arbitrary groups are exactly what sapient beings like to make. Sapience, sentience, perception, autonomy, these could be the significant defining factors, or perhaps an intelligent being created some with a soul and others without. Whatever the case, distinction and definition are important to establish, setting up rules even if the inhabitants of the universe are not fully aware of them. There is one more important aspect to consider, which was evident with the first category, but should not be forgotten for the other three. Whatever or whoever created this morality system is not infallible. Even if it is a natural phenomenon, it is likely to cause contention. It is, after all, you who devised it. It is inevitable that someone will criticize it or disagree with its tenets, both out here and within the setting itself. Who knows? They may even have the right idea. Does that mean that the philosophy the system is based on should be revised? Absolutely not. Flaws, strange quirks, potentially even contradictions can add an extra layer that elevates the whole thing. Unless the holes that can be poked into the belief structure lead to impossibilities or actual paradoxes, not just verbal or conceptual ones, I suggest you keep it. Build on its insecurities, work around its drawbacks, exploit its weakness to build up opposition. Our experiences may differ to such extents that no matter how official or ingrained the morality system is, there will be those who do not accept it, ones who would fight to overthrow it, or sever themselves from something they cannot endorse. If they are wrong, let them be. If they are right, allow them to question themselves. All you need to be careful about is to not make them deeply stupid, which is presumably something you are already aiming for with most characters and factions. A universally accepted, flawless, perfectly upheld judgment system can breed staleness. With all that said, judgment after dying can affect the world a couple ways, including no way at all. If the passage goes only in one direction, if there is no information flowing towards the land of the living, they have no way of knowing what awaits them. If the entities or automated processes that label the sinners and the saints cannot or choose not to interfere with the other side, they will not know about it. No ancient books that tell everyone how things are. No prophets or messengers to prepare mortals for the transition. Such a setting only differs from those belonging to the first group, beyond the meta-knowledge of course, is if we follow characters that already made the crossing, which could lead to some unique narratives in and of itself. People learning of truths they could never have expected, recontextualizing the entirety of their past and present existence. Apart from these outliers though, there generally is communication between the two stages. Deities, divine creatures, prophets or explorers presenting or gathering information. Information that has been filtered through their own lens, viewed from their own perspective. It is possible that they manage to get everything across with no biases, but it is important to consider the far more likely unlikely possibility of ever so slightly changing or completely distorting the facts. Even if the creator of the system themselves provided the material, gods can and should have flaws in their preconceived opinions. Writing omniscient beings is a tricky thing to do. Why? Well, first off, I'd assume no person in my audience is omniscient themselves or free of biases. Therefore, even if the celestial being knows everything we know about our world, they will still be unaware of future developments, things that have slipped our minds, or concepts we have not even considered. Through countless revisions outside assistance and extreme dedication, it is possible to write an all-knowing deity, but do not assume it is the least bit easy. So, as is generally the theme of this video, with each new audience member the tapestry of interpretations grows and the facts fade into the background. I cannot begin to tell you how much it annoys me when I face a setting where the whole world has it figured out. They are aware of how the universe works. They just know. Everyone accepts that knowledge, and there are no existential questions left unanswered. At best, the villains approach it from a different angle, but even that is not guaranteed. Such an approach is beyond unrealistic, painting with such broad strokes that the individuality of the inhabitants collectively vanishes. Quite frankly, it is not unlike a child's idea of the world, the societal equivalent of white noise. In either case, surety of some sort of afterlife or an extension of existence would have a profound effect on societies. I'd imagine religious fanaticism, dependent on the specific interpretation they operate under, would run rampant. If there is a surefire way to get yourself to heaven and score yourself an eternity of happiness, you would be stupid not to do everything in your power to achieve it. Naturally, depending on the extent to which the facts have eroded over time, there could and should be a level of skepticism, but it would still hardly resemble the real world. There might be a lot of speculation, but quite frankly, we have no idea what comes next, if there even is a next. And yet, some people cling to the idea to the extent where they are capable of foolish or horrible deeds just to alleviate their fears. Factual evidence would shift that balance quite significantly. That being said, fanaticism might not be a bad thing in some worlds. If the checklist to paradise only has bullet points that benefit everyone, it may genuinely change life for the better. Concepts we take as inherently harmful or beneficial can change a lot if the underlying moral framework is altered. Oh, and one more thing. What if there is only an unpleasant place to live on in? What if the best your mortal actions can get you is a slightly less shitty afterlife? What if the ultimate boon is to not have to experience the other side at all? Well, that raises quite a few interesting questions and presents the setting's inhabitants quite a dilemma. Would they enjoy life as best they can, pursuing happiness while possible during their fleeting existence? There is nothing to look forward to after all, so good memories are the best they can get. Would they opt to do evil just to escape eternal nothingness? Even if the afterlife is unpleasant or perhaps horrific, it is a life. They would still be. They could still hope and remember. I imagine entire religions and cults would form around the various decisions and options, philosophers pondering the great question with furrowed brows throughout the ages. And quite frankly, there would be no universally right choice. It would be highly dependent on the individuals, their values, weaknesses, and mental fortitude. Speaking of a universal right choice, let's move on to the third category. Settings where an establishment, species, or divine beings have laid out and perpetually enforce their moral system. They have a constant or ever-changing code, material that clearly or ambiguously separates good and evil. There are a number of important variables that come into play with such a world, even beyond the nature of the belief system. How exactly is it enforced? Are there incentives and punishments? If there are no punishments, incentives will often not be enough to prevent forbidden actions. If there are no incentives, people may opt to do the bare minimum not to get punished. How proportional are these boons and retributions? Are the rules too harsh, too soft, or something approaching fair? How are ill deeds and heroic acts detected? The mechanism through which every individual is observed is a big one, not only in terms of by whom, what, how, or to what extent it is performed, but in terms of ethics. Anyone who's not a politician is against mass surveillance, even when they don't do anything wrong or personal. It might be different for people who have always lived under the prying eyes of a cosmic entity or a powerful establishment, but a societal shift towards craving privacy is an interesting prospect. Now, a good portion of real-life religions believe in the all-seeing eye of deities. There are also some regions in the world where spying is overt and commonplace. Hell, it is difficult enough to not have your private data spread around by hundreds of corporations on the internet, so we all have at least some experience in this regard, which can be used to flesh out some viewpoints. Moving on through the stages of the system, who or what exactly deals out justice? Is it the same entity or group that made the rules? Is it a different faction? Are mundane people expected to carry it out at the risk of being punished themselves? Is it perhaps some automated construct? Is the system corrupt? Can it be bribed? Or does it enact a more severe penalty against those they dislike? Are the beings involved hypocritical, committing deeds they deem evil themselves? Are the punishments sins in any other context? Do they wholly exempt themselves from the system? Are there different rules for different species, races, factions, or even individuals? Is this whole ordeal universal, global, continental, national, or regional? Are there other groups or deities that force their own image on different parts of the setting? As I've previously mentioned, these beings and establishments could generally not be infallible unless the world builder puts in a significant amount of effort. Therefore, the system and its enforcement can rightfully be criticized for whatever reason. It is natural that there would be pushback, organized opposition, secretive and subtle, loud and violent, tactical and far-reaching. The resistance could be either of these, largely dependent on the power level of the oppressors or benevolent shepherds. But with any level of counteraction comes the question, is there any hope for change? Naturally, this applies to all other categories too, to varying degrees, but with the same level of importance. Can this system be overthrown? Can the status quo be defeated, replaced, or shaped to any degree? Is the world set up in a way that makes resistance futile? Is the best the rebels can achieve a concession from the enforcing powers, a change in the morality system for better or for worse? Or perhaps not even that? Perhaps it is all set in stone, an immutable part of the cosmos. Perhaps the only reason they fight is because they cannot remain idle with such injustice, their moral compass bringing them to desperate action. Better to die waging an unwinnable war than forfeit your morals. For some, that might very well be the case. However, in case there is a possibility for alterations, that opens up a plethora of options. What are the changes? How do they ultimately affect the setting and its inhabitants? With prior precedents, how likely are people to mobilize again? History is written by the victor, and in this case they can edit a far-reaching morality system too. Perhaps these factions, creatures, or entities managing the rights and wrongs of a reality are not sustainable indefinitely. Perhaps through the advancement of technology, rising population, or their own dwindling might, they would eventually fall and people would establish their own beliefs, making the transition to the first category. Or perhaps there are safeguards. Perhaps at the first sign of that happening, they start over, from the ashes of the past, or if they have the power of creation, with a clean slate and more experience. Speaking of a clean slate, let's move on to the last category, the one that might have a good bit of potential for interesting stories and settings, but it is also the most prone to error and flaws. To recap, category 4 entails settings where spontaneously, or as part of the creation process, a morality system was generated. It has built-in laws for what is good, what is evil, what consequences certain actions have beyond their immediate effect, potentially even pre-assigned alignments. I have already gone over multiple times the difficulty of writing an omniscient being or a flawless system. This group is perhaps most affected by this. Obviously, the ideology not being perfect or the whole framework being slated to be more partial to some than others are not world-building problems. It makes it more interesting in my opinion and gives a lot of reason for different religions and dissenting belief systems to emerge in spite of there being an observable universal law. But let's take a deeper look at the concept. There is obviously a lot of things to world build here, with the necessity to pay attention to how they interact with each other and the physical world in general. The big difference here is that this is not a part of the world enforcing its rules. It is the very reality itself having a way to judge, punish, reward, or impose any number of additional consequences. It is inherently inescapable and somewhat tyrannical, to be honest. It does not matter if you disagree or not, action and reaction are constants, like the laws of physics. As always, different people would contextualize this differently, but in most cases, they would look at it either through a religious or a pragmatic lens. It is either the will of the creator or just how things are. It is something they have to work around and live with, and few would think of it as a thing that can be changed. In fact, I can imagine some employing these interactions to their advantage. Perhaps a certain boon or retribution has alternative uses. People might find the easiest and safest ways to exploit these effects and potentially devise impressive advancements. Thieves get struck by lightning, set up a fixed scenario with a lightning rod above and a Faraday cage around you. You've just harnessed its power. This is of course quite an outlandish example, as these settings tend to have more subtle mechanics. However, this does highlight an interesting question. Where does the energy or potentially the matter required for this system come from? The creator? A dedicated source? Or from thin air? If there is a dedicated source, then that has to be refilled at specific intervals, which is something to account for. However, it is not increasing the energy and matter already in the world, just transforming or displacing it. Similarly, if the creator or creators are beings to which the laws of physics apply, then they require a source of energy and potentially matter to provide a fuel for their active morality system. However, if it is generated for the specific purpose of enacting the judgment, then there might be a problem. This removes the scarcity for at least some resources, and having unlimited access to energy is even more of a double-edged sword. The fact that people can, at will, bring more energy into existence, possibly at an exponential rate due to growing populations and rising living standards, well, that means it can easily fly off the handle. Let's take a common form of energy, heat. Now imagine people without the need to transform some other form of energy into heat, raising the temperature of stuff around them whenever they feel like it. Slowly but surely, average temperatures would rise as everything gets warmer and warmer. They might legitimately destroy the global biosphere before they realize what they are doing. Unlimited materials might have similar consequences, essentially creating more of something they can't utilize or dispose of, creating huge waste or perhaps even deadly pollution. The creator can, naturally, set up safeguards against this in advance or after the fact, but exploring such an apocalypse is an interesting premise to begin with. Now, so far, most problems we have discussed were obstacles for the inhabitants of the settings, rather than fundamental flaws that make the world wholly unrealistic and impossible. But there is one last slippery slope that has the potential to do actual harm to the world building. A universe in this last category that has pre-assigned alignments, which are immutable. Let me start off with a hot take. Making something inherently good or evil with no chance to change is not in and of itself bad world building. It is one way to construct a setting which facilitates some scenarios while closing down a number of storylines completely. I personally prefer if these traits are not universal and immutable, and redemption or corruption are possible for any and all beings. It tends to allow for more complex and interesting plotlines. But that is not to say alignment assigned at birth is not a viable thing to write, or that it is completely devoid of potential. Still, it can all change once we add non-sapient creatures and forces of nature to the mix. Whether non-sapient creatures can commit good or evil is already an interesting question. Ultimately, any being has to understand how their actions affect others and have some level of empathy for them. It is difficult to determine what a creature feels if it does not have the means to effectively communicate it. Many believe that animals other than humans, even part of humanity, are just mindless automatons, biological machines that do everything based on their instincts and learned behaviors. I'd argue that the presence of personalities, differences in attitude that are not informed by social evolution or genetics, disproves this possibility. Life is not deterministic. Everything living has some level of free will and therefore can be held accountable for their actions. So yes, I do believe sentient animals have the capacity to commit good, and to some extent evil, even though the latter is more difficult to identify. Now, what if the laws of the universe strictly set whether an animal, sentient or sapient, is evil or good? Do they tend to commit more benevolent or malevolent deeds depending on their alignment? That seems plausible, and in the grand scheme of creation, this can serve any number of functions. Intelligent design is a big sandbox for a powerful being to play around in, after all. But if we go any further with the effect of alignments, now, creatures not being able to commit anything evil is still in the realms of possibility. Be it by definition or their own moral compass, one can potentially go through life while keeping within some general guidelines. However, the broader the laws are, the more difficult it becomes. Just take do not kill as an example. Does harvesting and eating plants count? Those are still lives that are taken for ultimately selfish reasons. What about an immune system killing parasites? Does intention matter or only the end result? Is it physical impossibility or do they receive cosmic punishment as a result? As I've gone through it with the lion example, there are numerous behaviors in nature we can label as evil despite the advantages they present and the lack of malice involved. However, missing out on these avenues of evolution is nothing compared to the fate of those that cannot commit good. There can be a lot of issues depending on how good is defined. Creating life, protecting each other or their offspring, sharing food, these could all be off the table, which severely hinders their potential, especially if intent does not matter. And do not even get me started on creatures that can only commit evil. Such a being is simply not possible, at least not in a traditional species sense. One individual? Sure, but once multiple of them have to work together to reproduce. Now, this entire video was prompted for me when I learned of a world-building element in the Wheel of Time book series. I read the first two back in the day, but my child mind did not bother to store this bit, so it really surprised me when I heard it. Essentially, everything that feeds on the flesh of the dead, presumably human corpses only, is considered evil and a servant of the Dark One. These massive sweeping statements always rub me the wrong way. Decomposers comprise such a significant, no, invaluable part of the cycle of life that labeling them as evil simply because they do what they were made to do, something that facilitates life to persist, is baffling to me. Stamping them like that will solicit one question from me. What does evil even mean in this scenario? It just becomes a neutral term, almost meaningless, as it is no longer something that should be frowned upon, pushed back against or stopped. It is just part of life. Anyway, my point is that good and evil are intrinsically human concepts. Well, more like sapient concepts. Once we try to apply morals to anything in nature that has autonomy, we face a lot of difficulties, and most actions would fall into the neutral category. Hence, when building a world where a morality system is baked into the fabric of the universe, it is best to exempt non-sapient life from it. Not only does it serve little purpose, as the vast majority of creatures would not be able to comprehend why they are punished or rewarded, but it also needlessly complicates things with no tangible benefit. Additionally, if you make alignments preset, it is best to do so within a reward-punishment system, or affecting tendencies, rather than restricting actions. Not only does that forego the difficulties of moderating moral grey deeds, but it allows for potentially the most important element to any story, free will. Without it, actions have no weight. Decisions do not build character. Sacrifices ring hollow. You see, it could not have happened any other way. Even just restricting it can steal the thunder of potentially powerful choices. Penance is only possible for those who are permitted to redeem themselves. Evil is not truly evil, as they have no choice. So this is sort of my ending statement. Morality systems, whether self-imposed or enforced by cosmic beings, allow for a lot of interesting narratives, societies, worlds, something to play around with that can benefit from its own flaws, if they are recognized in some way. However, free will is necessary for them to be meaningful. The fewer limits on autonomy, the better. Thanks for exercising your own free will by watching this video from start to finish. I really appreciate it. If you feel like engaging in similar discussions, join my Discord server. You can even vote for future topics too. I don't tell that to people often enough, do I? Regardless, I also have a Patreon if you feel like supporting my endeavors. You can find a link to everything in the description, as usual. Feels good to be making some of my regular content again. I hope to see you in the next monster video about the Freston Lightcrawler, and happy world building in the meantime. Bye!